Olá, eu sou o Fabiano Lodi, eu sou diretor teatral, professor e pesquisador na área de artes da cena, e essa é a primeira de uma série de 2 lives internacionais realizadas pelas Oficinas Culturais do Estado de São Paulo, OIESES e Secretaria de Cultura e Economia Criativa do Governo do Estado de São Paulo, com produção da Leneus, produtora de arte. Esse projeto complementa da sequência as lives realizadas em agosto sobre Viewpoints no Brasil, em que diversos artistas de diferentes partes do país se reuniram online para compartilhar suas experiências com a técnica de Viewpoints, e também as lives de Método Suzuki no Brasil, em que diferentes experiências interculturais entre as artes da cena brasileira e japonesa foram apresentadas, com ênfase no Método Suzuki, por artistas brasileiros e estrangeiros. Eu aproveito essa oportunidade para convidar vocês para acessarem as nossas redes sociais e nos seguirem por lá. Nós temos um Instagram, o endereço é @leneus.arte, e temos também uma página no Facebook, que é Leneus Produtora de Arte. Nós também temos um site, que é www.leneus.com.br, e lá nesses canais vocês encontram mais informações sobre as nossas produções artísticas, projetos culturais e formativos, e também um pouco sobre a nossa história, que nesse ano de 2020 completou 10 anos. Eu deixo aqui também um convite para a nossa próxima live internacional da Leneus, que vai ser no dia 19 de novembro, quinta-feira, das 7 às 9 da noite, com o diretor teatral e ator Cameron Steele. As inscrições já estão abertas, as vagas são limitadas e a participação é gratuita mediante a sua inscrição. E para abrir essa live internacional, esse projeto de lives internacionais, eu converso com a diretora teatral Anne Bogart, que vai compartilhar um pouco das suas experiências artísticas em diferentes momentos da trajetória, especialmente como co-diretora da SITI Company, a companhia teatral sediada em Nova York, fundada em 1992 por ela em parceria com o diretor teatral japonês Tadashi Suzuki. Aqui no Brasil, o trabalho da Anne Bogart é bastante difundido, especialmente pelo amplo alcance da técnica dos Viewpoints, que, combinado com o método Suzuki, formam a base do treinamento artístico que a Anne Bogart vem desenvolvendo como diretora. Ela já publicou 4 livros, está finalizando o seu 5º livro, 2 deles já publicados em português no Brasil. O livro A Preparação do Diretor, publicado pela editora Martins Fontes no ano de 2011, e também o livro dos Viewpoints, publicado pela editora Perspectiva no ano de 2017, esse livro do qual eu tive o prazer e a alegria de fazer parte da equipe de tradução. Bom, a Anne Bogart já está aqui conosco, então nós vamos começar essa nossa conversa. Hello, Anne, welcome.
Hello.
Annie, first of all, thank you so much for your spending your time to talk with me and with the Brazilian audience, giving us the opportunity to know you and your work a little bit more.
It's my pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you, Annie. Let's begin talking about COVID, because this is the trendy topic of the moment. Do you feel that this worldwide pandemic moment can force huge changes on the way of making theater? Is it possible, for example, the emergence of new aesthetics or creative procedures? Or do you believe that it's impossible making theater online?
I'm not a fan of making theater online. It's not interesting to me because I think the real relationship is between the actor and the audience together, where they breathe the same air and where they can actually have a physical relationship. So it's not interesting. But that said, I think a lot will change because of the worldwide epidemic, the worldwide pandemic. And I'll tell you why, is because we've all had to stop. Our theaters, for the most part, are closed. You know, what I used to actually define theater, I would say, oh, theater, that's breathing common air. And right now, breathing common air is very, very dangerous. So suddenly, it's dangerous to be together. And yet our entire métier is about being together. Therefore, we have to examine what we have been doing and how we've been doing it and why we do it. And this is the moment to jettison, to get rid of things that we don't believe in and to honor those things that we do believe in. So this is a very, very important moment in terms of where theater heads in the future, because it is our opportunity to find out what our real values are, what we care about. That said, as much as I do not like Zoom, although I like speaking with you, I don't like it. I do think that it will have an impact upon the profession in the future. There are many performance venues in the United States that, and I've talked with the directors of these venues, and they say the same thing, which is that they have lost their local audiences because many of their audiences are older and won't go in a theater for a while, but they've gained an international audience because of the internet. Suddenly, you and I are speaking together, and so we have an international relationship that we might not have had without COVID. And so there's a change in terms of how we use the internet in relationship to the theater. And so I think maybe in some very positive ways. And I'll tell you, there's a very famous English actor named Mark Rylance, who was doing a project at the Guthrie Theater in Minneapolis about steel workers. And the production was stopped because of COVID. And he's starting to think about beginning rehearsals again. And he has a plan that I think is very, very interesting. And it's the first thing that I've heard of that I actually think, oh, this is a way to use our online resources or hybrid in a way that is useful to a play, which he wants to go back into rehearsal with his actors in Minneapolis, but to stream the afternoon rehearsals to people everywhere so that people will actually watch the production come into being. And he said, because the theater needs money, the rich people can pay money to ask questions. So they'll actually make some money with it. So that makes me think of is that sometimes in the theater, we're much too secretive about what we do, but to allow, to use this hybrid, to use this method of relationship to develop an audience, not only for the play, but for the process, so that the process of theater is shared in new ways with people who don't normally maybe go to the theater. So I think there are ways in which what we're learning in these many months and what will soon turn into a year will be useful in the future of theater, but all in the service of celebrating the actual human contact or the breathing of common air. The other thing that I think might make the theater better is because we are now dangerous to each other, that when we come together, it's more special. Because maybe, Fabiano, if you and I met, I would take care of the space between you and me much more than I would. I won't come up and hug you. We will be very careful. And that carefulness makes the space between us alive in ways that it wasn't before. And I think it's a very beautiful thing when the space between two people is not only cared for, but is dangerous and one is attentive. In the way that in martial arts, if you're in relationship to somebody, you say they're dangerous. And so the space between you is important. And if you turn your back on that person, the space behind your back becomes more attentive. So I think maybe how we treat each other spatially will be better. And so I think there will be ways in which this is a great lesson to us in the theater.
Okay, okay. Let's remember the name of the play that you said. This play for Minneapolis.
Yes, I think it's called Steel, S-T-E-E-L, because it's about steel workers in Pittsburgh, I think during the turn of the 20th century or around there, maybe a little bit before. So it's something called Steel. And it's directed by the great actor, Mark Rylance, who's a great English actor, very alive, incredible presence.
Okay. And you were around 40 years old when you founded the SITI Company. But in general, the artists start up their own companies earlier. And then I'd like to know, what were your motivations to begin a new challenge, even after being known as an independent director in New York City?
Mhm. Yeah, when I was a young director, the actors I worked with kept trying to get me to start a company. And I kept saying, no, I'm not ready. I have too many adventures. And so not only was I a freelance director in New York, I also spent a lot of time in Europe working. And so I learned many things. But then at a certain point, it was a conversation with Ariane Mouchkine, who's the director of Le Théâtre du Soleil in Paris, who said to me, well, what are you going to do without a company? She said, don't get me wrong, it's always a problem because people are leaving, there's always problems. But anyway, what are you going to do without a company? And I suddenly realized that all great productions I had ever seen in dance or theater, with no exception, were done by companies. And it became clear to me that that was the next step to take, was that a company, and I was already not a young director, but I said, oh, this is clear. And so that was why I decided to start it. Now 30 years, the SITI Company will be 30 years old very soon. So I guess I must be very, very old because I started the company when I was not young. And so 30 years later, I must be very, very old. But it seemed like it was time. But I sometimes think that if you start a company too young as a director, you're missing out on many, many adventures, learning how to work with all kinds of people in all kinds of languages and in all kinds of situations. So it's maybe better to wait.
Is that your life before the SITI Company? I'm so curious about how was your artistic career in your life before you having your own company? I mean,
Yeah.
what do you miss from that time, for example, and what is better now?
Oh, I think when I was young, nobody gave me a theater. And so I had to make theater. I was living in New York, in downtown. And in those days, New York was very affordable. It's not anymore. It might become affordable again after COVID, but it was not expensive to live in New York. And so I made theater with people who would work for nothing. And because nobody gave me a theater, we would do it in storefront windows or rooftops or abandoned schoolhouses. And so for years, it was really self-producing. I don't want to go back to self-producing. That's not something I miss. That was really hard, although it was a very good training. So the advantages of having a company are many, even though Ariane Mouchkine was right, is there's many problems, there's always problems. But you could walk into a rehearsal room and you have a language that you speak with a group of people, and you don't have to say much. It's just very, very clear how you work together, and you read each other. You can read each other very easily, and you can make work that's ultimately deeper and more meaningful because we figured out how to work together to share a brain.
And after 30 years old, you agree with Ariane Nishkini about the problems with having your own company?
Absolutely, but I learned that right away. There's always problems. You always have to raise money. You have to talk people into doing things. I mean, and people leave and you have to replace them. It's always problems, but it's worth it.
Cool. And like most of us, you are an artist and teacher as well. Like everyone, I think, in the whole world. But do these two roles mutually complement each other, in your opinion? Or if you choose only one of them, what would you choose to be?
Yeah, I met an actress once whose father is a surgeon, a medical surgeon. And she told me that surgeons have a saying. They say, teach one, do one, study one. In other words, do one means do an operation, teach one means teach what you learned when you were doing the operation, and study one means study about the field. And when she said that, I said, oh my goodness, that's exactly my ratio. I have to have all three things: teaching, studying, and directing. And if I have too much directing and no studying, it's not good for the directing. If I have too much teaching and not enough directing, it's not good. If not enough study. So you see, you have to keep all three in balance. So it's really not two, it's three aspects that have to be kept in balance so that there's enough of each.
Great. You always make a point to say that your influences came from Lane Paslov through the composition and Mary Overly with the 6 viewpoints. What are the most important aspects of your own work in which the Paslov and Overly influences are present?
Yeah, Eileen Paslov, who was very much part of the Judson Church era in New York, so she was during the 60s, she was very influential. She would say things to me like, or to the group, she'd say, make a piece from a dream. Nobody had ever said, make a composition, make a piece from a dream. So I had to remember a dream and then find a way to embody it. You know, that was very important. So the idea of giving a prompt, like make a piece about a dream, became very useful in terms of making plays. So if I'm working with a group of actors on a play, I'll say, here's 10 things I know that might be in the play. There might be fire, there might be a moment where everybody's speaking very fast, there might be a very violent moment. I'll say, make a composition that has all the things I imagine in it. So once the actors make that, then it becomes, they have an ownership with whatever the production is because they've created work using composition. And so it activates not only my own imagination, but the actors so that they not only, I'm not saying, this is what I imagine, I'm saying, this is what I imagine, now make something out of it and see if it's something we can use. Similarly, with Mary Overly and the Viewpoints, when she first showed me her work in 1979, I looked at it and I said, oh my goodness, everybody on stage is making the decisions. It's not me saying, okay, now move stage right, now sit down, now pick up the teacup. It's because there's a logic of movement in time and space. The actors actually make the first stroke on the canvas. And as Pablo Picasso said, the first stroke on the canvas is always a mistake, and the rest of the work on the canvas is to fix that mistake. It's very useful. So the actors make the first stroke on the canvas. They begin, they make choices. So the use of the viewpoints activates everybody in the room. So it's not a passive situation with actors waiting to be told what to do, but is that something that everybody's always initiating something together.
And just back a little bit in the time before the SITI Company, because I remember you had a company named Via Theater. And if I remember right, the Via Theater, you worked a little bit time with Jerzy Grotowski. You can tell us about your experience with him?
Well, actually, there were two Via Theaters. The first one was started in my undergraduate school at Bard College when I was 20 years old or 19. And it was started by a guy named Ashen Cameron, who believed that the only possibility for theater lay in the book by Jerzy Grotowski called Towards a Poor Theater. And so we spent 2 years together really looking into the work of Jerzy Grotowski. We ended up sort of meeting him, and also I did later at some point go to Poland. So it was very formative. And so for that, I was not the director of that. But then in New York later, when some friends wanted to start a production company, I said, the best name in the world for a company is Via Theater, which we had started in college, because Grotowski talks about something called via negativa, which means you get there via through taking things away. You just keep taking things away until it's just the actor. And so I thought, a great name for a theater company is Via Theater, in that you could say politics via theater, or economy via theater, is that you look everything through via theater. So I thought that was a great name. So I resurrected the name for a production company that I was with for about 3 or 4 years in my youth. It wasn't an acting company, it was really a production company.
Okay. Politically important to you in your company, in your career, and I have a question about it. We are living in a world that still watches both theory and practice of theater directing being articulated by white men in general. Despite all the movements around the world that claim for social spaces and equality for everybody, the women, Black people, the foreigners, especially there in the US, the people from poor urban area here in Brazil, are rarely doing the directing roles, for example. What else is required to change this reality in your point of view?
Yeah, I was just looking into studying the history of devised work. And I'm doing a series of lectures because we're on Zoom. I can't teach directing, so I'm doing lectures. And I'm looking at various tools that directors have. The first lecture was on ensemble that was started by two white guys, Stanislavski and Danchenko, in a restaurant in Moscow. They had a conversation that led to the Moscow Art Theater, that led to the idea of ensemble that spread around the world, everywhere around the world, that said, oh, the idea came from Russia. I was looking at Gesamtkunstwerk, or the total theater that was started by Wagner, another white guy. But now, and then I was looking at dance theater, which was oddly enough, dance theater in related to theater was started by women. It was started by Loie Fuller and Sarah Bernhardt and St. Vincent Millay and Martha Graham, et cetera. So this was a little bit more democratic. But now I'm looking at the history of devised theater and looking for the big bang of when that happened. And it really started in the early 60s with Joan Littlewood, who was an English director who essentially tore the script of a play that she was thinking of working on with her company and said, we're going to make it from scratch. And oddly enough, the women were the ones who started making devised work, because then there was Ariane Mushkin, who did the big devised work 1789. And for some reason, this is about breaking down the hierarchy and patriarchy of who's leading and what leading means. Now it's exactly as you say, that the hierarchy has to be broken down further and be more inclusive. And I think that directing, as you say, is seen as a sort of patriarchal profession. I know when I was a young director, there was really no women directors who were models, very, very few, especially in New York. That's changed now. There's a lot of, and in the States, many of the big theaters are being taken over by women and people of color of different racial backgrounds. So there's a huge shift happening in the States that's called BIPOC, which is really breaking down the hierarchy of the institutions, which have discovered a great deal of racist proclivities. So we are in a very shaky moment, and this is part of what has to change, is how we think about how organizations are run and who runs them and how they're run. So it's a process that I'm glad you bring up, because should be brought up a lot right now, because now everything's changing. So now we have to give more opportunities and to create opportunities for certainly for directors of all backgrounds.
Okay. The SITI Company has worked in this situation for bettering the opportunities for many other people.
We're working on it. I mean, in the last few months, you know, in the States, since the demonstrations against racism, I think SITI Company has been undergoing a very, very serious self-examination to look. We always thought we were very liberal and inclusive, very internationally minded, but I think we have much more work to do, and we're moving together to change, and it's a process.
Nice. Congratulations for your initiative, for the
Thank you.
growth.
Well, it's necessary, I think.
Yes, I agree totally, absolutely.
Yeah.
So Annie, now I'd like to share with you some doubts I have about viewpoints and composition, if you allow me, and you can help me to explain some points
Mm.
of these two techniques, starting with the composition, because I understand that the composition can be a kind of directing training. As director, we often are concerned about the actor training, but I think the directors need to train themselves too. Composition could be a possibility for that to happen. Or put simply, why the directors do not train themselves?
Well, I agree. First of all, I want to say that your doubting is very healthy. I think that one of the biggest trainings as a director is to doubt everything. I think you should doubt constantly. So doubting is a practice. Now, I run the graduate directing program, the MFA directing program at Columbia, and I had a lot of doubts about how you can teach directing because I think directors need constant training. And so what I do is I put the directors through the same thing I went through as a young director, which is they have to direct a lot right away. So at Columbia in the very first semester, I take 6 directors, and both Brian Kulick, who's the other directing professor, and they direct 2 fully staged productions a week, which means by the 3rd week, they're on their 6th production. They have to cast it. I mean, it's short, like a half an hour, but they have to produce it, they have to stage it, they have to design it. And by the 3rd week, they don't know who they are anymore, and they've used up all their director tricks. And what's important is that they have to put the work in front of an audience. So every Monday for my group, they are performing for an audience. It could be of friends, of family, but they have to bring an audience. And so they have to actually have their work up in front of an audience, not read, everything memorized, full production. And then every Wednesday, they get 3 hours of critique without an audience. So it's very rigorous. So it's essentially the training is to put work up in front of an audience, be embarrassed by it, see how terrible your directing is, and then go back in the next day and direct again. So I don't really believe in readings or assistant directing. I don't think it's healthy. I think the only way to train as a director is to make work and put it in front of an audience, be embarrassed, feel like your pants are down, and then the next day start to direct again. And it's not quite the same as actor training, certainly. But beyond that, I think that the directing is a lifetime of study, that you study all the time. You study history, you study sociology, you study anthropology, you study languages, you study you study politics, and that is another kind of director training. Personally, I feel that because the actors have a very strong physical training, I have to have my own physical training. So I'm a practitioner of Tai Chi Chuan, and I was for a long time of Aikido. I can't do it anymore. So I always felt like as a director, I needed to have to go into classes where I was not leading it, but I was the worst student in the room. And it was very challenging physically for me. So those things, I think, are the kind of directing training that is necessary.
Wow. Thank you for the answer.
You're welcome for the answer.
Open my mind and open my ideas. Thank you. Now I have a doubt about viewpoints or an observation. I don't know. But the viewpoints spread out a collaborative theatrical philosophy and alternative training to work as a group. This is the remarkable aspect of viewpoints. However, the vocal viewpoints, for example, aren't very much noticeable, noted, compared to the physical viewpoints. It seems to me that the vocal technique at SITI Company is more connected to the Suzuki method than the viewpoints. Is this right, or doesn't make any sense?
No, you're absolutely right. And I think that's what a lot of people don't understand about Suzuki training, because one thinks that Suzuki training is this very hard physical thing to do that compromises your balance and challenges you every day. It's actually a vocal training because it teaches you how to relax the parts of your system that need to relax when you're in an extreme physical circumstances, so that you have a open and reflexive and responsive system ability to speak with differentiation, with timbre change. What I did with the vocal viewpoints is I just took all of those qualities because I wanted it to continue to teach that inside of the viewpoints training. And so I just took all of the qualities that are worked on in Suzuki and put it in a viewpoints context. But you're absolutely right that Suzuki training is ultimately a vocal training. And unfortunately, it's hard to know that because people who are not very good at Suzuki training just sound like they're shouting all the time because it's so difficult, and it looks also like they're angry all the time. And that's a big misunderstanding of Suzuki training, is it's actually to find an openness and a relaxedness in a certain part of the body so that the voice can have color and differentiation. So you're right.
Eddie, I have another question about viewpoints. Sorry, because I'm so curious about something I read. I read in the beginning of SITI Company the process to build the 9 physical viewpoints was on the 4 or 5 years, and you tried to create 2 new physical viewpoints, named imaginary and another, I don't remember the name right now. So I'm curious about these 2 other viewpoints that take out of the physical line.
It wasn't imaginary. It was the 2 were duration and floor pattern or topography. Those were the 2 added ones. And that came from watching the SITI Company work and seeing that there was something missing. And the idea of duration it's something you play with as a group, is how long you let things last, how extended or short. And it's not something you do on your own, but you do together. And floor pattern, because I thought there was too much emphasis just on lanes and grids, but actually there's a lot of curves in space and dots. So we added floor pattern or topography in addition to that because it seemed to be missing.
And lyrism, I remember the name. I read lyrism and imaginary.
What?
Is this right? This
what?
2.
What was the first word?
I don't remember where I read about the lyrism and imaginary, 2 physical viewpoints that take out of the physical viewpoints. Is that true or not true?
Oh, I don't know about that, but maybe somebody else came up with that. I don't know.
I need to check my source.
That's okay.
Annie, do you follow something about Brazilian theater or something about our culture, like music, visual arts, literature?
Oh, I'm a big fan of Brazilian music. Come on, really. I mean, some of the most beautiful music comes out of Brazil. I just thought when I first started meeting Brazilians, I thought they were the most beautiful people I'd ever seen in my life. I kept meeting Brazilians. I kept saying, they're so gorgeous, beautiful people, you know. And then I think the culture is rich, and I think and it's why I think the music. So I haven't seen a great deal of Brazilian theater. What should I see?
I think you can see the contemporary theater in most the popular popular theater, like the directors and companies from around the whole Brazil, from the different areas from Brazil, because the theater group is so strong here, much connected with the traditions, and trying to rescue some manifestations, unscience manifestations.
Well, You know, I will tell you something I shouldn't tell you, but you know, at SITI Company, Brazil has become a joke, and I'll tell you why. Because we keep getting people who will call from Brazil and say, "We'd like SITI Company to come to Brazil, Sao Paulo or Rio, wherever," and we always say, "Yes, we'd love to." It never happens. I can't tell you. Maybe 20 times we've had people say, "Oh, we want to invite you to Brazil." And now if I come in and say to the office, city office, and somebody says, "Oh, somebody from Brazil called," everybody laughs because it's never happened.
Yes, I personally tried to bring SITI Company to Brazil several times, but
Yeah,
failed. I don't know why too, but here's
yeah,
our call for the cultural institutions here in Brazil. Hello,
exactly,
Cultural Institute, SESC, and many
exactly.
others. Bring SITI Company as soon as possible.
Yes, yes, yes.
Personally, you stayed here in Brazil or South America, any? Do you know our country?
I've only been, we took a show to Bogota in Colombia, and then we worked in Peru, in Lima. And those are the only two places I've been in South America. But I loved them. I'd like to come back. But Brazil keeps inviting us and nothing happens.
Our invitation is done, Annie. You need to stay here with us, sharing your
Yes.
wisdom and the procedure theater for us.
Yeah.
So for finish
Or you
our
could share
conversation, let's
your
talk.
the
Please, please.
I could share wisdom, but then the Brazil could share wisdom with me.
So, Annie, we are arriving the final of our conversation, and for finish, let's talk about a little bit about the future. Because in the first October week, the SITI Company announced the plan for ending activities as a company in 2022. What are your expectations for the final season, and what are your personal plans for the future?
Well, first of all, I want to explain that we had maybe 3 or 4 years of discussion as a company. You know, we're coming to our 30th year. Are we an institution or are we a group of people? In other words, do we find as we get older, do we bring in new people to run the company and new actors and new designers? Or do we say, you know what, we're just this group of people? Because mostly SITI Company members don't leave. They come into the company and they do not leave. And so it's a very solid company. And after much soul searching, we said, we are not an institution. We only thought that we would maybe last 10 years, and we're coming on 30 years. So, so we decided we are this group of people. So let's get to our 30th year and do a big celebration, and then transition to not a producing company, but a way we have archives and a book. And if people want to teach, they can use, you know, that company members can be sent out various places, but that we would bring this thing to an end. So we're you know, this we decided before the pandemic. And so since the pandemic, so we were going to have a big final season. We're still going to do that because we think theaters will be open. But what we've done is we've pushed our archives sooner. So we're all now working on our archives, and we're planning for our final season to have plays in New York, and then go to all the places we've toured and take some of our older shows on tour to say goodbye, in a sense, to the venues where we performed. And then I would say maybe Brazil would have a chance to bring SITI Company and a show right, this is the chance to do it in 2022. It's the time to bring SITI Company in its big final season. Yeah.
I'm praying for it to happen.
Yeah. Well, maybe you've helped it happen.
Yeah. Another question about direct. Have you special affection about a play you directed at SITI Company?
You know, I always think that the play that I'm directing is the best in the world at the particular moment. So it's very hard to say one. There were some plays, like the hardest play I ever did was one called Small Lives, Big Dreams. It cost so much pain to do it, and yet the company loves it, you know? So it's hard. The most joyous play is our play, Bob Rauschenberg America. It's just full of joy, you know? Then there's a play which I think in terms of profundity that talks about why human beings die and why we have to die is Death and the Plowman. So that's, in terms of philosophically, is the strongest play. I also think that we've done a lot of collaborations with dance companies and visual artists. You know, we just did something which actually everybody in Brazil who's watching this should see. It just premiered yesterday. It's a show we did a year ago called Falling and Loving that we did with Elizabeth Streb and her company of dancer acrobats and SITI Company and the playwright Chuck Mee. And if you go to All Arts, they're going to stream it for the next couple of months, and it's called Falling and Loving, and it's joyous and fabulous. And maybe that's the most joyous play, you know. But to answer your question, each one is like, it's like saying, which of your children do you like the most? You can't really say that.
Okay, Annie, thank you so much for our conversation. I'm so happy and honored to hear from you. Thank you for your niceness, your affection all the time. And I hope to see you soon, very soon, here in Brazil with SITI Company for the final season.
Yes,
showing
I think so too.
some play here.
Yes, I agree. And thank you for your good questions.
Thank you, Annie. Thank you so much. See you soon. Essa foi então a primeira live internacional com a diretora Anne Bogart. Fica aqui o convite para a próxima live, a segunda live internacional, no dia 19 de novembro, das 7 às 9 da noite, com o diretor e ator Cameron Steele. Muito obrigado a vocês pela presença online, por terem assistido e compartilhado esse momento, e nos vemos na próxima. Até lá!